is Brittany Hager McNeely, and I'm the Director of Operations at the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center, HERC, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm very happy to welcome you on a virtual field trip today called From Ignorance and Fear to Knowledge and Understanding, Jews, Judaism, and the Holocaust. During this virtual field trip, you will hear from Rabbi Jen Mangold, the Assistant Rabbi at Congregation Shalom in Milwaukee. Rabbi Jen will talk to you a little bit about what it means to be Jewish, some of the ideals and traditions and holidays of the Jewish faith, as well as giving you an inside look at Congregation Shalom and its beautiful sanctuary. Next, you'll hear from HERC's Director of Education, Dr. Dan Homscheld, who will give you a quick look at the long and painful history of anti-Semitism around the world. Last but not least, you'll hear from a local Wisconsin Holocaust survivor, Susie Fono. Born and raised in Budapest, Hungary, Susie survived the Holocaust before moving to the United States, to Milwaukee, where she now is a Speakers Bureau member, traveling to schools around the state of Wisconsin, speaking about her experiences during the Holocaust. I'm glad that you're able to join us today, and I hope that you have an interesting experience learning a little bit more about Judaism, anti-Semitism, and the history of the Holocaust. Let's dive in.
Shalom, everybody. My name is Rabbi Jen Mangold, and I am the Assistant Rabbi at Congregation Shalom in Fox Point, Wisconsin. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you today and have an opportunity to teach you a bit about Judaism, about our sacred text, our culture, our tradition, and our values. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm delighted to teach you about our religion. I wish that I could be in our beautiful sanctuary at Congregation Shalom right now to show you around, but I will tell you a little bit about some of the artwork that is in our sanctuary. So something that is interesting about Judaism is that in our sanctuary where we pray, we don't have any pictures of people. We don't have any pictures of faces. And it's this idea that God is not a face or an image in that way that we would pray to, but that God is more of this force or energy that is intangible, that we cannot see or touch, and that we will not be distracted when we pray by these images. But we do have some beautiful artwork in our sanctuary. First of all, our ark, where we keep our Torahs. It is so magnificently done. It is turned into a tree of life with all of the different stained glass pieces, the leaves all around it. Hopefully you'll be able to see a picture. And each of the different leaves is a different color, and they're all unique because they're these pieces of stained glass that are all different shapes and sizes. And in that way, we think about human beings, that we are all unique and we all have something different about us that makes us special and holy, but we're all part of one big tree or one big family of humanity, and we are all united. Also, Torah is known as the tree of life, as it gives us knowledge and it nourishes us spiritually. So the idea that when we pray in the sanctuary, that we can look at this tree of life and we can think about our Torah as a tree of life that inspires us. The walls in our sanctuary, where behind next to the ark where we pray on the bima, it sort of looks like the Western Wall. And that is a very holy place in Israel that was actually the remnant of our old temple in Israel that was destroyed thousands of years ago. And a long time ago, that was like the central place where Jews prayed. So of course it was such a tragedy when this temple was destroyed and the Jews could no longer pray there. And so nowadays when Jews go back to Israel and they will pray at the Western Wall, and they will pray at this wall that was part of the ancient temple, and they can feel so connected to their ancestors who prayed there long, long ago. Something really amazing about this wall is that people come from all over the world, and they will write down little letters where they pray. They'll write a little letter on a piece of paper to God, a prayer, and they'll put this piece of paper, this prayer, into the wall. There's like little grooves in the wall that you can stick your prayers in. And so the wall is filled with all of these different prayers from all over the world, and some of the prayers fall down and they're right in front of the wall, and it's just so magnificent that people from all over will bring their prayers to this holy place, and it means so much to them. And even when they walk away from the wall, there is a tradition to not turn your back on the wall right when you walk away, because it's such a holy place, but to actually walk backwards away from the wall so that you're still looking at it for as long as you can as you go on your way, just illustrating what a holy place it is. I'd like to start off by teaching you about our Torah. Torah is our Bible, our sacred text. Many of you know the Torah as the Old Testament. And for us, that is our major central text that Jews all over the world are reading and studying every single week. And the Torah unites our people. And we believe that our people received Torah thousands of years ago, and that this story has been inspiring generations ever since. And it's been passed down from generation to generation to generation. It actually takes a scribe 1 full year to write a Torah. The Torah is written on parchment sewn together from a kosher animal, and it's written with a feather and ink, and it is part of a scroll. So as we open the scroll, as we open the Torah, we can see the whole story of our people all as one big story coming together. And our Torah is read weekly in different portions. So every week we read a portion of our Torah, and then the next week we go to the next portion, and it takes us about a year to read through the whole Torah. It's a very big story. We don't just read it in 1 week. We spend about a year reading it. And one thing that's very fun and very exciting is when we get to the end of the Torah, after a full cycle, a full year of reading it, we have a special holiday called Simchat Torah, which means joy of Torah. And on this holiday, we celebrate that we've just finished our story and we are preparing to read it all over again, because the next week we're going to start from the very beginning. So on Simchat Torah, we celebrate that we just finished the story and that we're going to be starting it again. And the way that we celebrate is a lot of people come to temple and we open up the whole Torah scroll. So many synagogues will have this tradition, as I just said, of opening the whole scroll, and people will make a big circle around the sanctuary, and everyone will get to hold a tiny piece of the Torah, and we're all standing around holding it, and you could see that the entire Torah is open, and it can take up almost the entire sanctuary if you have a big sanctuary to be able to read the whole Torah. And it's really awesome because each week we only read a piece of it, but when we open the whole thing, we can see it as one large story of our people and that it all fits together. And then after we celebrate Torah, and a lot of times people will dance with the Torah, and it's such a festive, happy time. And then when we are done with that, we read the very last sentences of the Torah, and then we go back and we read the very first sentences, and we start all over again. A bar and bat mitzvah ceremony is when a 12 or a 13-year-old boy or girl is coming to age, we would say. They're starting to be mature, and in Judaism, they are treated as an adult in terms of their responsibilities. And one of the key parts of a bar or bat mitzvah ceremony is when this 12 or 13-year-old boy or girl gets to come up to the Torah and read a portion of Torah that they've been studying for a long time. And now I should tell you that the Torah is in Hebrew. So many of the bar and bat mitzvah students have spent years learning the Hebrew letters and the Hebrew alphabet so that they would be able to read Torah at their bar and bat mitzvah ceremony and for the rest of their lives, so that they would be able to read Hebrew and to have that connection to our people. So imagine these 12 or 13-year-old students coming up in front of their family, in front of their friends, in front of their community to read words of Torah. And in the Torah, we have stories of our people. It's basically like a scrapbook of the stories of our people over time. Some of the stories you might be familiar with. We have stories of Adam and Eve. We have stories of Noah and Noah's Ark. We have stories of Abraham, stories of Moses, and stories of our people in the desert as they were hoping to reach the promised land. So all different stories make up the Torah and different laws. Torah actually means law. So we learn a lot of laws and responsibilities of our people by reading Torah. So as this 12 or 13-year-old becomes a bar bat mitzvah and they read a portion of Torah, they get to connect with that portion. So maybe they're reading a story about Abraham, and then they hopefully will always have that connection to that story, and they'll have the opportunity to teach their family and their community about what that story means to them. So as you can see, our Torah is very special to us as we keep reading it over and over, hoping that there is always something new to learn from it, time and time again. We keep our Torahs in the ark, which is in the sanctuary, so that they can stay safe. We don't want anything to happen to our Torahs. We want to keep them protected. So even within the ark, the Torahs are covered in sort of a dress or a beautiful cloth so that they stay safe. And often they have little crowns on top of them, just showing how important they are, that we keep them safe and beautiful and protected. And we read Torah with something that's called a yad. And that allows us to point to the words of Torah as we are reading so that we don't touch it with our fingers. Because again, we really want to honor the Torah. We don't want to get it dirty or anything like that. And we want the parchment to stay safe for as long as possible. So you will see bar and bat mitzvah students reading from Torah with the yad, and that helps them to read in the best way. I'm excited to share with you about Torah because it means so much to our people. And one story that illustrates that is that many Torah scrolls were actually saved during the time of the Holocaust. And we have a Torah scroll in our synagogue that our bar and bat mitzvah students actually get to read from at their ceremony as they become a bar and bat mitzvah, which means a son or a daughter of the commandments. And this is a very big moment for them because this Torah was saved from the Holocaust. During the time of the Holocaust, it was hidden so that it would not be destroyed. And years later, it was found. And there are a lot of Torahs like this that were found, and then they were brought to different places in the world to be read again in a new community. And we feel very honored that we have this Torah scroll for our students to read from on their bar and bat mitzvah as they reflect on the fact that they are continuing the legacy of our people in such a holy way. One of the major beliefs in Judaism is the belief in one God. Our story teaches us that Abraham was one of the founders of this idea of this belief in one God, and that his father, there's a story told that his father sold idols, and idols were a way for worshiping different gods, and they were these statues that people could pray to worship different gods. And Abraham came along, and the story teaches us that he smashed these idols, and he told his father that he didn't believe in idol worship because he believed that God was one, and that God wasn't something physical like a statue that we could pray to, but that God was more of a force or an energy or something that we could not see or touch with our eyes, but something that we could feel and connect with. And so this idea of God as one, monotheism, we see this in other religions today as well. And one of our main prayers, which is known as the watchword of our faith, our anthem, it's so holy to us, is the Shema. And the Shema is a very short prayer, but it talks about hearing one another, listening to one another as we declare God as one. And so it is a custom for Jews to actually close their eyes as they pray the Shema, because again, we're trying to hear one another's voices. We're trying to listen to one another's voices as we declare God as one. So it's a prayer that is not only about personal belief, but about being a community and hearing the voices and harmony of one another as we celebrate God's oneness. So I'm going to sing this prayer for you now, just so you can get an idea of what it sounds like. And something very special about this prayer, the Shema, is that Jews all over the world, in all different countries, all pray the Shema, and it means so much to our people. So I'm going to sing it now. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. So it's not a long prayer, but this prayer means so much to us, and Jews all over the world, as I said, are praying this prayer multiple times a day. And one special story about this prayer is that during the time of the Holocaust, after the Holocaust had ended, there was a man who was searching for Jewish children who were misplaced, and he went to an orphanage and he asked the woman in charge of the orphanage, "Can I please see, are there any Jewish children here?" And the woman said, "No, I don't think there is any Jewish children here." And he said, "Please, could I just look around? Could I have maybe half an hour with them just to see?" And she said, "No, I'm sorry. I really don't think there is any Jewish children here." And so the man said, "Please, could I just have 5 minutes with them?" And she said, "No, there's no way. They're not Jewish." And he said, "Please, just 30 seconds and I'll be able to tell." And the woman said, fine, you can have 30 seconds or whatever it is, a small amount of time with these children. And so the man went in and he saw the children and he said, "Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu." And 5 children said, "Adonai Echad." And so they were able to complete the prayer. They were able to finish his prayer of the Shema. And just by that alone, these words were engraved onto their hearts, even after such a difficult, painful, challenging time of the Holocaust. And he was able to see that they were Jewish. So that's just one story, just to illustrate how central this prayer is to our people. In Judaism, we have all different values and morals and ethics that we live by, and our Torah teaches us many of these ideas. The first one I will talk about is B'Tselem Elohim, and that means that we are all made in the image of God. So this belief that human beings are made in the image of God hopefully will inspire us to treat every human being with love and respect and kindness. Because if we believe that they are made in the image of God, that there's a spark of the divine inside of each of our souls, then hopefully we will treat each other in that way, with that act of heart and that act of compassion and that act of love. Our Torah, as I said, is filled with all of these commandments, 613 commandments approximately, and all of these commandments are designed to help us to behave in a holy and loving way and to be our best selves. Some of these commandments talk about the way that we will eat. Some of them talk about the way that we will act. One of our commandments tells us to give tzedakah. Tzedakah means justice and it means righteousness. And so when we give tzedakah, we're giving money or we're giving food to those in need. And it's something that we are commanded to do. It's not something that, oh, today I feel like giving. No, it's something that hopefully every day that we strive to give to the best of our abilities. Many people in their homes have a special box called a tzedakah box. And it's almost like a piggy bank, but it's a box that we collect money in that we will give to those who are in need. And many Jewish children make tzedakah boxes in religious school, and they start to collect money that they can hopefully someday give to the poor and the needy. And it's an act of love. We have another idea in Judaism, love your neighbor as yourself. And again, that goes with the idea of caring for others the way that we would care for ourselves and treating others with kindness and love. Judaism teaches the idea of tikkun olam, and that means repair the world. So we have this idea that the world, during creation, that there were these vessels of light, but they were shattered into pieces and pieces and pieces. And this story teaches us that it is our divine mission to put these pieces back together, in that way repairing the world. And so a lot of Jews, when they go out and they do social action projects or social justice projects, they will say that they're working for tikkun olam. They are working to repair the world. And that each of us, we can't do the whole thing by ourselves. Of course, we can't repair the whole world, but each of us can do our part. And that hopefully we can put all of these pieces back together and bring goodness into the world. In Judaism, we believe that the Messiah has not yet come, and in Reformed Judaism, we believe in this messianic time that we are looking forward to, this time of harmony and peace, and we hope that our acts of tikkun olam, of repairing the world and bringing goodness into the world and light, will help to bring upon this messianic time when all can live together in peace and harmony. I'd like to show you my talis. This is called, either some people call it a talis or a talit. And this is what many Jews will wear when they pray. And I think of it sort of like a blanket that I wear when I pray. You can wrap it around yourself like this. And when many Jews pray, not all of them, because of course everyone does things in their own way, but when many Jews pray, they will wear a talit, and I find it very comforting, as I said, like a blanket of God that I wrap around myself, and it's supposed to be symbolic of the commandments in the Torah. The Torah actually does teach us to wear tzitzit, and see these strings? These are called tzitzit, and they're tied to the end of my talit. And all of the twists and the turns, it's hard to see, I know, on the camera, and all of the strings and the talit itself, there is a number that it all adds up to, all the twists and turns, and it's a little bit complicated, but the number that it adds up to is 613. And as we said before, there are about 613 commandments in the Torah. So while a Jewish person is praying and wearing a talit, they can sort of twist their fingers around the tzitzit, and it's sort of a reminder of all of the different commandments in the Torah that they would hope to be able to live out in their lives. So it's just one way to sort of live out that idea and hopefully inspire us to continue living holy lives and making our lives a blessing. This is called a yarmulke or a kippah. They all look different. So this one has this pretty design on it. Some of them are just one color. It doesn't really matter in that way. And it's a head covering. So many Jews will wear these while they pray. Many Jews will wear them when they're out in the world every single day. And the idea is that God is above us, and it sort of keeps us wanting to be humble in that way of thinking that we are not at the top, we are not the be-all, end-all, but there is something above us as a reminder that God is above us and that it's not all about us, but we are part of something that is bigger than ourselves. So you might see Jews wearing these when they pray. You might see Jews wearing these when they're out in the world. It really depends on the person. I'm excited to share with you a bit about our holidays. And first, I'll tell you about Shabbat, the Sabbath, which is a holiday that happens every single week. And it's our holy time that begins Friday night and goes all the way till Saturday night. Shabbat is our day of rest, and it's inspired by the idea that God took this time to rest after creating the world, after all of those magnificent works of creation, that God needed this time to cease from work. And so we as human beings, we take this time to cease from work and to have this time of renewal and recharging and resting. And so many Jews will actually they will not do any work at all, and they will not even use technology. They will not drive. And that is a way for them to really honor this idea of ceasing from work. Not every Jew observes Shabbat in this way, but that is a more traditional way to observe it. Many Jews will simply spend time with family, with friends. They will go to synagogue and pray, and they will just make the time holy in whatever way that means to them. Maybe they'll spend time in nature, outside, and just have that chance to reflect on all of the blessings in their lives. And then on Saturday night, we have a closing ritual called Havdalah, which is separation. And that helps us to ease back into the new week ahead and to end Shabbat, as we know that Shabbat will come back in a week, but we have to make that transition into the week ahead in the most positive way. Shabbat is definitely one of the most special parts of Judaism because it unites Jews all over the world. There will be Jews all over celebrating Shabbat, lighting Shabbat candles, and the candles are lit on Friday night right as Shabbat is beginning, and that light of Shabbat is symbolic to the light that we will feel all around us during this holy time. There is actually this idea that on Shabbat we achieve a second soul. So it's just that idea of holiness and all of that magnificence, and then for the rest of the week we go back into more of the ordinary, knowing that that extraordinary will be coming back soon. I'd like to tell you about a few of our other holidays. Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah are our two major holidays that we actually call the high holidays. It's funny because many people think that Hanukkah is our biggest holiday, and I think that's because it's right near Christmas time, so they kind of seem like they're both like two big holidays for the people who celebrate them. Hanukkah is actually a minor holiday for us. It is a time of joy and celebration, but the high holidays are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which come usually in September or October, depending on the timing. And Rosh Hashanah is known as the Jewish New Year. So on Rosh Hashanah, we think about our past year, we reflect on everything that we did, and we hope to be better, holier people in the year to come. We strive to think about our goals for the next year, and we hope that it will be a sweet year. One of the things we do is we eat apples dipped in honey, and that sweetness hopefully will inspire a sweet new year ahead. And then Yom Kippur comes just days later, and Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. It's the day that we can atone for our sins from the previous year. And some people might think, oh, why don't you have Yom Kippur first to apologize for your sins and then start the new year? But we actually have the new year first. And hopefully that sense of a new year will give us what we need in our hearts to realize that we have a new chapter ahead of us and that we have to free ourselves from those sins and from those regrets and to apologize to all of those who we have hurt as we begin this new year. So the holidays go together as a time of reflection and a time of hoping to be better in the next year. Many Jews who don't come to synagogue during the year for whatever reasons will come to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and there will be so many people at services because it really is this high holiday time where Jews come from all over to be together and to celebrate these holidays. Another big holiday that we have is Passover. And Passover is usually around April, and it is a time where we celebrate our people as they left Egyptian slavery and they were freed and they went through, they crossed the Red Sea, the sea parted, and our people were able to go with Moses, and God led us, and they began their wilderness journey toward the promised land. And so Passover inspires us to think about the freedom that we have and that our people had to work for and that God helped our people achieve. And it inspires us to help others today to achieve freedom so that we can create a world where everybody enjoys that sense of freedom and justice. I want to thank you so much for listening today. It was such a pleasure to share just a little bit about Judaism with all of you. Of course, this is such a rich and intricate tradition that this was just a tiny bit of so much values and tradition and culture and knowledge and wisdom and spirit. And I just hope that in the future you'll have the opportunity to learn even more about Judaism, as it is so good for all of us to learn about each other. So thank you very much, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.
Welcome to the second part of our program. My name is Dr. Dan Humschild, and I'm the Director of Education at the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center. I'm going to talk to you about anti-Semitism. And as you can see, this will be a brief history of anti-Semitism. Because while anti-Semitism is a massive problem, I only have a couple minutes to talk to you about it. So let's get started right away. The three main things that I'm going to talk about in this presentation are what anti-Semitism is, when it emerged, and what about now, whether anti-Semitism is still something that we should be thinking about. So to begin with, for a simple definition, anti-Semitism is the hostility toward or discrimination against Jews as a religious, ethnic, or racial group. Now, I know what you might be thinking. A religious group, an ethnic group, and a racial group? How can it be all three at the exact same time? Well, that has a great deal to do with how people understand what it means to be Jewish. Because Jews have been defined throughout history as a religious group, an ethnic group, and a racial group. To begin, let's talk about being the religious group. This is maybe the most common understanding of Judaism, which is to say people who follow the Jewish faith. But people who follow the Jewish faith have been oppressed for thousands and thousands of years simply because of their religion. Ethnically, we consider an ethnicity things that bind people together through customs and traditions. And the Jewish people have many significant customs and traditions. Often they're affiliated with what they practice within the religion. People who practice those cultural traditions have also been persecuted since antiquity, which is to say, since the time of the Romans and the Greeks. Then we have this pseudo-scientific concept that we call race. And race has been used to discriminate against lots of people since about the 18th century. And Jews were also categorized as a race. And so since the 18th century, Jews have also been persecuted as a distinct racial group. Now, when did anti-Semitism emerge for the first time? Briefly put, a long, long time ago. In fact, as long as we have a record of Western civilization, basically, we have a record of Jewish persecution. For example, the Old Testament is a story of Jewish individuals, but the story of the Jewish people that comes to us from the Old Testament indicates that Jews were persecuted even as far back as those times. In fact, the very first image that you saw during this presentation was of the Ark of Titus. The Ark of Titus was sculpted in 81. That's a two-digit number, folks, 81. And in 81, they were depicting the siege and the sacking of Jerusalem, the primary city of Jews in the early days. And that happened in the year 70. So this depicts an event of a barbarous destruction of a city that happened in the year 70 and was pitted against the Jewish people then. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about anti-Semitism during the Middle Ages, because during the Middle Ages, anti-Semitism took on forms that we actually see happening again in the more modern era. For example, in the Middle Ages, Jews were allowed to live in various kingdoms spread all throughout Europe. They were expelled from one after the next, but when they arrived in a town, often they were required to do certain things, including wear distinguishing marks on their clothing. For example, in the depiction that you see here, a man is wearing an orange O on their lapel. This is something that you might recognize from the era of Nazism, when Nazis forced Jews to wear yellow stars of David on their lapels or on their sleeves. This wasn't something that the Nazis invented. It was a callback to the forms of persecution that Jews faced way back in the Middle Ages. Similarly, Nazis required Jews to live in ghettos. A ghetto was something that actually was used during the Middle Ages as well. This is a depiction of one that was in Frankfurt, Germany, in around the 1500s. The ghetto was used in the Middle Ages to both protect Jews and keep them isolated so that they would not be attacked by the masses, but also so that they would not influence the masses, so that the masses would not have to interact with them thoroughly. Jewish businesses and other things happened inside of the ghetto, and Jews were allowed to leave the ghetto for certain times of the day, but then almost always required to return at night. In the Holocaust, the Nazis also used ghettos with a bit more of a nefarious purpose. The ghetto was built in the modern era, as all ghettos are, with the express purpose of making those who live inside perish, slowly, usually. But it was, again, a callback to something that had happened during the Middle Ages. Additionally, during the Middle Ages, Jews were persecuted through the use of pogroms. A pogrom is an organized act of violence that's usually perpetuated by the state or the police. These pogroms, or these acts of violence, would often be spurred on by some misunderstanding of the Jewish population, and it would be compelled by the frustration and fear of the people who didn't understand these neighbors who lived in that other neighborhood and wore those things on their lapels. They also didn't understand their religious or ethnic cultural practices, and so they made up wild stories about them. For example, one of the stories that was made up about Jews was this conception of the blood libel. The blood libel is this terrible lie that includes the idea that Jews would kidnap Christian children and bloodlet them, use their blood, so that they could bake bread during their Passover celebration, which happens around Easter. This is entirely false, but depictions like the one that you see here scared the population into thinking that this was actually real. And so every once in a while, there would be these massive acts of violence that would expel Jews from one location to another because they obviously couldn't live somewhere where they were going to be viciously attacked. As you might recall from the history of the Holocaust, pogroms were also used in the early stages to terrorize Jewish populations. The most famous of these is Kristallnacht, which happened in November of 1938. In the modern era, anti-Semitism took on a slightly different tone because of the concept of race. Race was developed by what we call science, but race is a pseudoscience. It doesn't really have to do with our actual genetic makeup. It simply is the way that we understand our phenotypes, or the things that present on our skin, the way our bodies are composed, etc. And in this image, you can see that these men who are wearing suits and ties are inspecting the nose of this gentleman to consider what kind of person he is. This is a complete crockery. It doesn't have any real foundation in science, but we believed it. We bought the concept that race was a thing so wholeheartedly that it allowed us to consider persecuting people in a whole variety of different ways for a whole variety of different things that they could have never possibly had anything to do with. Race gave us the opportunity to create wild conspiracy theories about the genetic predisposition of certain individuals to be evil, or the genetic predisposition of certain individuals to be bad for society, broadly speaking. These kinds of ideas marinated in the minds of many Europeans, including one named Wilhelm Marr, who coined the term anti-Semitism actually in 1873, when he founded the League of Anti-Semites, which was dedicated to reducing the influence of Jews on German life. You can see in the quote that I have there, his conception that the Jewish question is the axis on which the wheel of world history revolves is one such conspiracy theory, that the way to understand how history happens, the way to understand how the entire world works, is to understand how the Jew influences it. This is a crazy conspiracy theory, but one that was picked up on again and again, including by the Nazis. One of those conspiracy theories we call the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was published in Russia in 1903. It was some anti-Semitic propaganda that suggested the Jewish people had an evil plan to dominate the world. It was proposed that it was some sort of pamphlet that was taken from some Jewish secret society and then published for the world to see, so that the world could actually understand that Jew was actually like a snake who was going to encircle the world and cut off all of its lifeblood. This is completely and utterly preposterous, but it was an incredibly popular pamphlet that circulated around the world. In fact, in the United States of America, a man named Henry Ford, who you might recognize because of the cars, distributed 50,000 of these pamphlets to convince the American public that Jews also had this capacity for world domination and ultimate destruction. Then we have somebody like Adolf Hitler come who comes around and buys into all of these conspiracy theories. He, in fact, suggests that the personification of the devil as the symbol of all evil assumes the living shape of the Jew. In short, that the Jew is a living version of the devil. This is not possible without all of the different kinds of anti-Semitism layered on top of one another. And then we have it consolidated then in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in the form of Nazi ideology. Nazi ideology took anti-Semitism to the next level. They created a situation in Germany and across Europe that made anti-Semitism a part of everyday life. It found its way into law, education, popular culture, and basically every single part of the totalitarian scheme that Nazis created. For example, in law, the Nazis created the Nuremberg laws of 1935, which basically identified Jews through who their grandparents were or their great-grandparents were. So even if you had converted away from Judaism and you had no relationship to the cultural or ethnic categories of being Jewish, you could still be considered Jewish if your great-great-grandparents were Jewish, if one of them was Jewish, which is, again, an understanding that only comes to us thanks to race, but is still nonetheless tied to religion and to ethnic principles. In Nazi education, children were taught how to identify Jewish people and to be wary of them at all times. For example, this is a book that was distributed throughout Germany in the 1920s and 30s, especially in the 30s, called The Poisonous Mushroom. And the poisonous mushroom, as you can see, is depicted as with the stereotypical features of a Jewish person, a caricaturized version of a Jew, who is, in fact, a poisonous mushroom. The whole idea of the book is to educate children to discern between a good mushroom, or a good person, and a poisonous mushroom, or a bad person, right? In the depiction you can see on the right, there's a whole group of blonde-haired schoolboys who are learning about the stereotypical features of the Jew in the imagination of the Nazi. So you can see the number 6 is actually a depiction of a Jewish nose, supposedly. And you can see the Star of David there, which of course Nazis would force Jews to wear later on to allow children to identify the enemy immediately. In pop culture, we have the flourishing of anti-Semitism, and in a way that we understand even more profoundly today through the use of propaganda. Joseph Goebbels was the Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, and he created a whole variety of different materials for people to consume on an everyday basis, so that anti-Semitism became a general undertone of everything that was happening in Nazi culture. For example, he created films like The Eternal Jew, or posters like Behind Enemy Forces, the Jew, which you see there, that depict Jews as being somehow an underpinning force that is pitted against Nazism in every way. So in the poster, for example, the depiction of the Jew stands behind the flags of the Soviet Union, of the United States, and of Great Britain, who of course are the enemies of Germany during World War II. It was the presumption of Joseph Goebbels and Adolf Hitler that behind those forces was this conspiracy theory, the idea that the Jew was somehow forcing the hand of those other countries into war and to antagonism with Nazism. If it wasn't for the Jew, then the Americans, the Brits, and the Russians would all agree with Germany and help them in their cause. Now we're on to the present day. The question is, did anti-Semitism die with Hitler in 1945? I think we all know the answer already. Absolutely not. Anti-Semitic incidents have surged. In 2017, according to the Anti-Defamation League, they surged nearly 60% from the previous year. And incidents have taken place across every state in the United States, anti-Semitic incidents, that is. Wisconsin, for example, where this is being created, saw a 329% increase since 2015 in terms of anti-Semitic incidents. So it's by far not something that we can just talk about in the past, but something that's going on right now. The common thread between the ancient world, the medieval period, the Holocaust, and now is that ignorance and fear can often lead to hatred. So sometimes the actions are very, very small. For example, on a campus where I teach at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, a man was found holding a swastika in front of a celebration of the birth of the State of Israel, also, ironically, in front of the Golda Meir Library. that might be something that seems incredibly small or incredibly minuscule relative to the massacre that occurred in Pittsburgh, which is the other image there. But in both cases, ignorance and fear led to a certain amount of hatred. And whether it's holding up a sign or walking into a synagogue with live ammunition, the underpinnings of that is ultimately anti-Semitism. So it's something that we all need to be very aware of, and be very aware of even the most minute ways that this continues to thread its way into our lives. I want to thank you for being with us for this 5th program, and thank you for your attention to this 2nd part. I'll turn it over now to our survivor.
And you grew up in Budapest?
In Budapest, yeah.
In the city?
Yes, in a nice apartment building. My parents tried to give us everything they could to what middle-class kids got, ballet lessons that I hated. And
now Judy liked them, right?
my sister was the dancer, and she was terrific. And when we were forbidden to perform in the year-end recital because we were Jews, my sister was heartbroken. I was happy. Oh my God. Nobody has to see how bad I am at that.
And in addition to the ballet training, you had school how far away?
The Jewish day school was a block and a half from us. And by the time I started school, Jews could only go to Jewish schools. And Judy started in public schools, but then she had to transfer to the Jewish gymnasium. And all our friends were all in the neighborhood. That's where we went to the park. We had the ice skate rings, and that's where we could all misbehave, of course.
When you were going to the school and the tide started to turn, how did you know things were changing? Did you stop having to go to school?
By air raids. I was in 1st grade when when the more serious air raids started. It was even before the Germans entered, there were air raids. And everybody had a backpack ready. Mom had all the medications that she could carry with the Band-Aids and soap. We all had to wash up every single day. My mom made sure. Wherever we were, Mom was the youngest mother. She was the youngest adult, really. At that time, she was 31 years old. But everybody in the group called her Mommy. She had a respect. Nobody resented all the things that she asked them to do to protect her kids.
You told me that when she married your dad,
Yeah.
she was 18 and he
She
was
was
30.
18.
And she was a little wild? And they expected she would be controlled
rebellious, let's put it that
Rebellious?
way. Yeah. In Jewish families, you were not wild. You were rebellious. And my grandfather found the perfect husband for her, a 30-year-old gentleman from a nice Jewish family. And they figured he was 30 years old, working at the grain exchange, and grandfather thought this 30-year-old will keep the 18-year-old, Guess who was the boss in the family? We learned a lot of good things from her, including how to yell at our kids, and I yelled.
You were saying that, and as you told me this yesterday, it sort of defined everyone's role in the family and what their strengths were by their backpack. So Mom had a hospital in her backpack.
Yes.
What did Dad have?
Dad had his colored pencils and the drawing pad. Judy had playing cards. I had sewing needles, colored thread, crochet hook with a yarn, and pieces of fabric to sew on.
You sewed, You still sew? I saw you
Yes, I'm
sewing
still
room
working
yesterday.
still working full time. What would I do? Sit and play mahjong or bridge or
Who
whatever?
taught you to sew?
My grandma Rose, when I was 4 years old. I just finished a sweater for a lady, and it's finished by hand because it wouldn't have looked good by machine. I learned also how to do either you don't do it or to do a good job of it. And I love what I'm doing. It's not forced on me or anything. It's just, I like it.
So while you're taking time to hear the stories of the different women or hear their songs and get through the air raids, were there bombs when the air raids came?
Oh yeah, and I cried a lot. I was scared a lot.
I bet.
It's no matter how they try to protect you. A girlfriend of mine, parents were taken, and the aunt brought her over to us for Mom to care for her. And we grew up in the same apartment building, so we were good friends. But her father never returned.
There seemed to be, and again, I would think at 7 years old, really disjointed existence, that people would constantly be moving around to different places to try to stay safe, and your family did that as well.
Yeah.
Did you have any idea why you were doing this?
That was explained to me.
Yeah.
And Mom told us that we knew they're going to move into our apartment because they had Swedish papers. They got Swedish papers through. Raoul Wallenberg was a diplomat, Swedish diplomat stationed in Budapest. And when he started seeing what was happening, slowly Jewish laws came in even before the Germans entered. He went back to Sweden and talked his government into giving Swedish visas to Jews. And when the Swiss government, also neutral, learned about that, they also gave out Swiss papers, and my parents could only get the Swiss papers. And our building became under Swedish protection, and this row of apartment buildings were next to the Danube. I mean, I keep saying that the Nazis weren't stupid, only evil. All those row buildings became Jewish buildings with the big yellow star on it. We moved in. Mom used to talk to the lady across the alleyway, and that building became Swiss. And so Mom asked, and the lady said we can move in with them.
So did having Swiss papers ultimately help you much?
Just so much here and there that it was supposed to, but plenty of people were taken. They came and took everybody except for the children. And Mom came back. Second time, I found out afterwards, I don't think they told this to a 7-year-old. They took them down to the Danube and shot every third person into the Danube. Next time, every second person was shot into the Danube. They keep saying somebody up there was watching over us because Mom came back again. When she was called up to go, and she went because she had to report. They told them to come back next day with a bag because they were going to go and work someplace else, where Mom didn't go. She felt that Dad trusted her with Judy and me. She wasn't going to let Dad down, or us. But the superintendent of the building looked out for us very much and protected us. Also, the assistant superintendent. I don't know how Dad arranged things, but Mom always knew where Dad was, which quarry they took him, and where he was.
But before we continue, because you got Mom standing up for the kids, but
Yeah.
before that, Dad was taken. What happened about Dad being taken? Do you remember much? Or what do you know?
I cried a lot. They told me we won't be seeing each other for a while. Dad was always there for us. But then Mom said, somebody will take care of Dad, and they did. When they brought him back to the Nazi house, which the assistant superintendent told Mom that Dad was in the Nazi house, which was between concentration camp and Auschwitz or other. And so from labor camp, they brought them back. He was last to be interviewed, next to the last to be interviewed. And he quoted that they said, everybody's lined up except people with Swedish visas, Swedish papers. Raoul Wallenberg was living a few blocks from this Nazi house, and he was watching what was going on and tried to help. And so my dad quoted our next door neighbor's name, Peter Dennis, and he knew everything about them, except for one thing, the mother's maiden name. And that's the one thing they neglected to ask him. Second time they came, he asked that question, he got beaten up, and they just left him there. But the third time, this was December of 1944. They didn't care. They just wanted to kill many Jews. So they just took everybody, put them on the wagon, in the cattle cars, and that's how they were trying to pull out the bars. They did. The gendarmes didn't do anything. They said they felt that, why? They're going to get killed. It's 10 o'clock at night, it was martial law. Nobody could be outside, you know. And he made it back to us. He said he felt that he'd rather die trying to get back to us than in a concentration camp.
One other thing you explain in your book about this, so the people are in this railway car and they know they're going to be on a train to their death, but the train didn't move. So they broke out the windows, you explained. Yeah. And Dad
because they waited for more people.
Right. Because they wanted to kill everybody.
To fill up everything, all the wagons.
When they broke out the window, your father didn't go right away. He watched to see what happened. And he said he didn't hear gunshots, so he knew he'd be safe if he had a chance.
Yeah. He took that chance to get back to us.
There's a story you skipped over I want to come back to, though. So he's at the Nazi house. Somebody brought you to see him.
Yeah.
What happened?
The assistant superintendent came to Mom to say that he was at the Nazi house, and take her coat off, leave her purse, everything. And he used his wife's coat and his wife's papers and took Mom to see my dad at the Nazi house. Next time he took me, and I keep saying they must have given me a tranquilizer or whatever. I didn't fly into my dad's arms. We couldn't recognize each other as daughter and father. I got to see him, but not Judy. Nobody had paper. Can you imagine what would have happened to this man and his family? He used his child's papers for me. But they did a lot for the Jews in that building. So it was just incredible.
Every survivor, we've had the opportunity to hear their stories, points out somewhere in their journey through this horror, there were people who were helpful, who were kind because they saw what was going on that was wrong. And here's a man, as you said, who risked everything.
Yeah, and that one man, when they came the third time to take us to the Danube, he recognized my mom. I can still see him. Big. I mean, I was 7 years old, everybody's big. But this guy was big. Black overcoat, black derby hat. And he looks at my mother and starts yelling at her, using bad words. I learned later those were bad words. They were just scary. We didn't take the school bus. We didn't know bad words. So he starts yelling at that, I'll take care of you later, you never listen. I mean, it was terrible, scary. After everybody left. Mom had this smile on her face. Says, you know who that was? He used to deliver coal to my mom's parents' house. He recognized Mom, and that's how good my family was to everybody. That this Nazi, he saved our lives.
So as the war came to an end, you go back to the same apartment you had been in, same building. Dad comes home. Did he go was he in the Nazi house all the time, or did they send him somewhere else?
Well, from the Nazi house, that's where they were going to deport them, but that's where he came. He was in the quarry before. That's when they first take him. The only person in the family who didn't have to wear the yellow star was my Uncle Victor, Dad's second oldest brother. The oldest brother died in Russia with the Austro-Hungarian army, left behind his wife and 2 kids. George, who was in age between my sister and me, spent a lot of time with us. His mom and sister had to work. Anyway, what it's in my head always, what it's important that we hear. Learning from terrible things, what's happening. My aunt, Elizabeth, my dad's sister, was dying of cancer. My dad's parents were with them. Everybody in the family except us moved in with them so no strangers would be with Aunt Elizabeth and watching her die. But Grandma, my dad's mom, who had several strokes already, was sitting by her side and tried to take care of her, because her husband and the other aunt, Aunt Rose, they were also moved in. Their husbands were dentists, and they did not take them away because there they had, at that time or whatever, they were also physicians, they were doctors, and then became dentists, and so they were working in a hospital in Budapest somewhere, wherever they were ordered to, so they were able to be there. And Uncle Victor was taking care of everybody. He was distinguished himself in the First World War, and then there was communism in Hungary in 1920, 21, whatever. He was such an outspoken anti-communist that he was jailed, and the Nazis found his record, so he was excused from wearing the yellow star. Also, he was blonde and blue-eyed, and so he could go to the stores, get food for everybody in the family, because he wasn't accosted by the Nazis. So he kind of made sure that we all were taken care of.
So all along the way, through all the horrific, you had little stars shine down upon you.
Yes.
Victor and the super and the assistant
and Uncle
super.
Victor was great.
You said you didn't know how at the time, but somehow Mom always knew where Dad was.
Yeah, because of the assistant super. I don't know how Dad made that arrangement with him. This guy always knew where Dad was, and any of Dad's friends who were in the same camps, work camps or whatever, so Dad also sent them, and he knew everything where Dad was and how he was doing, and he's the one who told that he was in the Nazi house. It's just, it was amazing that it was somebody was watching over us, and Mom took us to visit Grandma Rose and Grandpa David. But the Jews could go out. We had a 2-hour time when we could go outside, and we went to see Grandma Rose and Grandpa David. Grandma Rose was wearing her gray Shabbat suit. Her hair was back in a bun. Called me my little flower. That was the last time we ever saw them. And of Grandpa David, my David is named after him. I remember we always did, the holidays was always at their house because we could walk there, and that we went to the same synagogue as my mom's parents. I remember Grandpa swirling a chicken over our heads. I don't know what the hell, what holiday that was. I just remember the chicken swirling over my head. But
Do you continue that tradition today?
of course I do.
One of the things you told me yesterday, we were talking, and I was actually about the German Nazis, and you said the Hungarian Nazis were actually worse.
They were worse. When they took us to the ghetto at the end of December of 1944, after Dad got back to us, the walk to the ghetto was horrendous because our escorts weren't German soldiers. They were from the Hungarian Nazi Party, and the kids, our escorts were between 12 and 17-year-old, terrible. If you had to walk the straight line, you couldn't look this way or that way. If there was a dead body in front of you, you had to step on it because if you stepped over him, you could get shot for it. I was between my mom and Dad. Dad had his other arm over Judy, and when they weren't looking, they tried to lift me over those dead bodies. By the time we got to the ghetto, there were over only a half of the people that started out from the building. They got either shot, whatever they felt like doing, or beaten up. The only time I use this word, it's punks. They were Nazi punks. I was so afraid. I was just...
How long was the walk, distance-wise or time-wise?
A long way. A long way. There was bombing, there was air raids, they didn't care. They were happy if we die. That's all they wanted to. It's just every day of my life since I got to this country, I thank them for letting us come here, letting us in.
Thank you so much for joining me on this virtual field trip, where I hope you enjoyed the opportunity to learn a little bit more about Judaism, to gain a better understanding of the history of anti-Semitism, and also to hear the incredible story of survival of Holocaust survivor Susie Fono. I would invite you to visit our website, shown here, where you can listen to Susie Fono's full testimony, as well as look around and see the many other Holocaust survivor testimonies which we have archived on our website. Thank you again for joining me, and I hope that we'll see you again. Goodbye.